Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. Today I'm with Paula Radcliffe MBE for a special episode of the Experts in Sport podcast. Paula is a former Sports Personality of the Year, a 3-time winner of the London Marathon, 3-time winner of the New York Marathon, and the 2002 Chicago Marathon. She held the world record for the fastest women's marathon from 2003 to 2019. She's also a 4-time Olympian. And of course, she graduated from Loughborough University. She earned her first class honours degree in modern languages in 1996, and just 6 years later was also awarded an honorary doctorate from Loughborough. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, Paula.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. It's brilliant having you on. We're going to get into lots of detail about your time at Loughborough, your time as an athlete and what you're doing now. So mainly we're going to discuss preparing for events and competitions. We're going to look at how you prepared for maybe London and New York and World Championships. And we'll have a look at how that may have changed over the years. And then finally, we'll probably look at discussing more about what you're doing now. So your work with Children with Cancer UK, the Paula Radcliffe Marathon Academy, and the work that you're doing with Families on Track event. So lots to get through. And we're going to talk straight away about your time at Loughborough. So tell me more about it. What was it like for a young Paula Radcliffe joining Loughborough University?
It was a very, very exciting time for me. If I look back, so it was 92 when I came to Loughborough for the first time. So kind of back end of 91, I was looking at finalising my university choices and vividly remember driving up to Loughborough. It was very, very first and foremost in my mind that I wanted to prioritise my studies and find the best course, while at the same time being very conscious of the fact that my athletics was a huge, huge part of my life, and it had to work around that. So I guess I kind of had a little bit in the back of my head, I don't want to go to Loughborough just because of the sport. It has to be a really good course, and just being very, very excited to come to Loughborough and to visit the Modern European Studies department and see how it worked. And honestly, of the choices available to me at the time, back in 1992, it was the best languages course available because it was one of the only ones in the country that enabled me to study both of my languages with economics and not have to drop one all the way through. Everywhere else I went to, and the school was very keen to try and push me towards Cambridge. I went there, didn't like the course at all, and so could, with a very clear conscience, go to Loughborough knowing that I wasn't sacrificing my academic aspirations for my athletics ones. I could combine the two perfectly. So it was a really, really amazing scenario for me. I was like an hour or so up the road from Bedford, an hour and 10 for my coach driving. And so he would come up once a week. I would go back at weekends. And so we'd get quality sessions together. But I also, for the first time, was in a training environment where basically I had I kind of slotted into the athletics team as kind of the little sister with loads of big brothers who were basically training partners and encouraging me and looking out for me in a really, really good environment. So it was the first time I could drop into one of George's Tuesday night sessions and really be stimulated and brought on by that training environment. I met my husband that way, but I also made a lot of friends because I was in that still academic environment, but as different to school. I was surrounded by a lot of people with very, very similar interests.
It's so many questions. It's great to hear what you just said there around all of that. So my role, half of my role is around lecturing and half of my role is around connecting with sport. So so many things going through my head. Firstly, what are the two languages that you followed through?
French and German. So I studied French and German with economics. The Modern European Studies course at Loughborough then was French, German, economics and politics, and you chose any three and basically stuck with those three. And
you mentioned there George. You mean, is that George Gandhi?
Yeah, George Gandhi. So he and my coach already knew each other a little bit and certainly got to know each other really well through my time at Loughborough, and we'd regularly connect, would be together at Olympic Games when George was coaching John Brown.
And yeah, that the connection there with coaches and athletes that you talked about as well, we often get it across the sports. So not just within athletics, you know, you get this cross-contamination, for want of a better word, where different sports are happening, different coaches can have those conversations, different athletes can be supported or challenged on the way they're training or future events, how they're preparing. All those kind of things seem to go on. What kind of things did you get from that specifically?
I think for me, it was really, bear in mind that I'd grown up in a very, very strong club environment. So I'd been part of a great team of girls at Bedford and County growing up. And so I was used to having people around me. But now I was going into, Loughborough University in the 90s was the place to be for athletics training. And so you'd be going into that clubhouse on a Tuesday night, and you could barely get in the door, the amount of people that were there and the quality of people. I can remember Alison Wyeth would be coming up from London. John Nuttall would be coming down from Preston. We'd have John Brown coming down from Sheffield. There'd be people coming from all over the country to join the training session, as well as everybody who was actually studying at the uni, and people who had stayed on in order to stay involved in the athletics side of it as well. So it was a really, really strong training environment for me, because like I said, there would sometimes be, if we were doing mile reps or 6-minute reps on the track, there would be like 7 or 8 rows of people starting each rep. It would be that many people. And so it's kind of hard to express that today, because I know times have evolved and the standards are perhaps higher, but I'm not sure the depth is as strong because we didn't have that many choices of sport.
That's a good point. I mean, when I pull onto campus in the morning now, it's still amazing. You get so many people running around campus. So I'm not necessarily going down to the track, but just whatever time you get there, there's some form of sport, athletics going on campus. And it's really inspiring to be there. You think, do you know what? I'm going to bring my trainers and have a run around. Yeah. I'm old now, I'm in my 40s, and I train in power. I train in power base. You think some of these athletes must think, what's this old guy trying to do? But they don't. They don't. Everybody's in there training, doing their best, and it is a really good environment. I just probably feel conscious that maybe they're too good for me. I shouldn't be in there. But yeah, in terms of your experiences at Loughborough, you've mentioned they're kind of the student athlete and the importance of academia, but also your sport. How did you go about combining those two things?
It was definitely a learning experience. I had set the scene a little bit. I'd won the World Cross Country as a junior in March of 1992, and then done my A-levels. So basically came to Loughborough off the back of slightly disappointed 4th in the World Juniors over 3,000 metres, but kind of really with that mindset, right, I know what I'm doing with my athletics, and I really want to consolidate that over the 4 years of my languages course, to be able to try and make it as a professional athlete at the end of that. But at the same time, I wanted to do as well as I possibly could on my degree side as well, and to get the best possible degree there. So I knew I was essentially going to be burning the candle at all 3 ends in terms of trying to make it work across the board. And probably the biggest learning experience was my first year. I was in Elvin Richards Halls when I started. My mum literally walked into the room and cried and said there isn't space. But that wasn't what bothered me. The hardest thing was that it was a catered halls. And so the food was finishing by 6 o'clock and training was starting at 6 o'clock, 6:30. So I was basically trying to exist on packed lunches, probably not enough sleep because it's obviously a little bit noisier in student accommodation. So I ended up getting sick, and moving out at the end of my second term. So already into the accommodation that I'd found and sharing a house with a couple of other athletes, which was a much, much better setup for me. I had an amazing setup. I was sharing a house with 2 other athletes. We were around the corner from another lot of 3 or 4 athletes, and we could hook up for morning runs and kind of just share refueling afterwards. And it was a much, much better experience for me. I could still bike into all of my lectures and things. But I kind of was able to find that balance between the time for training, the time for recovery, and the time to do all the student things as much as I could in moderation as well.
And every alumni drops in their halls. They often love their halls and things like that. And there's new accommodation now, so around the Elite Athlete Hotel, which is certainly geared up more for athletes. So I'm pretty sure, the standard of accommodation is definitely changed over the years, as of many things that we'll touch upon. Before we do get into some of the more training nuances and things like that, a few more slightly more random questions for you. So, what can you tell us about Loughborough? What's your number one experience at Loughborough? More around, it might be anecdotal, it might be something that's gone on, or, student life. What was it like?
Gosh, it's hard to pick one thing, because I think it's a big change, isn't it, going to university, when you go from a school environment to that university one. You're on your own. And yes, I traveled a lot. I'd done a lot of competitions abroad. So I wasn't used to being on my own. But it was that kind of organizing everything and pulling it all together. There's a huge growing up process to that, but you're also at the same time doing it with making a lot of really, really good friends, that I still stay in touch with to this day. So I think that camaraderie side of student life was really, really cool. Trying to think of different. I remember vividly my first 6.5. Then there was Tuesday night was a 6.5 or 9.5 mile run, and basically a couple of the guys I was running with were trying to say, okay, when we get to the traffic lights, everybody stops and waits for the traffic lights, and then we got to the traffic lights and they basically just ran across, and that was an excuse because it was a race, and it was no prisoners. Every time out there was somebody almost lacing up racing shoes to get out and prove it. So it was kind of learning to balance that as well, because it could be very stimulating and you could be in danger of overtraining it and not being ready for the races just because of all that side of it. But if you learn to balance it really well, I think that was great for me in terms of the support from the other athletes. So even towards the end of my degree, when I was getting ready for the Olympics in 96, I had really good friends at the uni and just close around the uni runners who would actually come out for me. It was 6:30 a.m. sessions, hill sessions up in Bradgate Park. It was still dark when we got out there, in order to be back for lectures, and that kind of support and just friends, just doing it to help me out, was amazing, because obviously I had the motivation of the Olympics to be out there at 6:30 in the morning. They didn't have that. They were just helping me. And so, hugely grateful for that network of friends that I built up, over that time. And it's great to see some of those. Ian Grime was one of those, and his son, Evan, is now running phenomenally well, and coming up through the ranks, his daughter, Erin, as well.
You mentioned there about the competition, and I think from reading around prior to speaking to you, and you've already mentioned you met your husband at Loughborough. I think from things I've read, you talked about running with your husband at some point. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that would be at Loughborough after. So, and basically being quite competitive with each other.
Yeah,
was that the case?
That was probably the whole way through. And it wasn't just with my husband, but yes, certainly. I mean, my husband was coached by George. And we met in the classic Barley Mow, after training. Everybody from the athletics club was down at the Barley Mow in Loughborough. And that's when we met for the first time. But yeah, I clearly remember one of the sessions. So as I say, we used to do the 5-minute reps, which was pretty much the guys would be running a mile. I would be somewhere in that. And I do remember at one point he was having a bad workout and I was catching him, and there did start to be the joining in from people around who were already seeing what was going on. But yeah, in a good hearted way. And I think, he helped me a huge amount, even before he transitioned to training partner at the end of his career, just in terms of I was doing a lot of my runs with those kind of top 1500 meter guys, because for me, I guess I was more towards the 5,000 meters, starting to get towards the 10,000 meters at that point. So for Sunday runs and long runs, like I said, I always had people to run with, and it was great camaraderie. It was probably good for them as well. A bit annoying at times to have this girl pushing the pace on all the time.
That's brilliant. So my wife and I, we met at 16, 17, and the only time, and it still genuinely would be true now, that we used to nearly fall out was when we played badminton. And, you'd give a line call of that was out, and you'd be like, no, it's not. And that's where our competitive streak used to come in, and we had to just ban ourselves from doing it. Mm-hmm. Where's your competitive streak with each other now? Do you still go for a run and think, I've got him covered here? Is that still happening?
No, he won't actually run with me now at all. So yeah, we won't. I would run with him because I've now really transitioned really well to the social side. I don't even time my runs, and I just go out and enjoy those. And I run a lot with friends, but he won't because he says he will push too hard and then he'll get injured. So the same reason that Crammy won't run with me, Gary won't run with me either. But yeah, I mean, we just do other things and chat about different stuff. And I guess the competitive side. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's competitive, but he knows that if he wants me to do something, he'll just tell me that I can't do it. And that is definitely a challenge. So it's just say, yeah, but you couldn't do that. This needs fixing, but you couldn't do it. Because I actually really like trying to fix things. And so it probably comes in more on that competitive side there, but he hasn't got a chance because he's no good at stuff like that.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge thrown down to him, but he's being very sensible. Fair enough. You've thrown the carrot out. See if he goes for it or not. I've got before we move on. I've got one question that alumni always tell me about a certain tradition. Okay, mm-hmm. And we don't need to mention what this tradition is, but right. I want to check if you know what this tradition is and if you've got any stories around it. So the tradition revolves around something to do with the running track that people may do at certain times. You're smiling.
I've never done it. I have never done it. I didn't think I would actually be good at it, but it always came at the wrong time of the year. So yeah, I have.
So you know people who've done it.
Women were half. So okay. It was slightly easier at the time for women.
And do you know people who've been involved in this tradition?
Yeah, I know people who might still hold the record. I'm not even sure what the record would be now, but yes.
So there's a record. I didn't know this. I've been asked about this by numerous.
Tradition, we have to be careful here that we're talking about the same tradition.
We do. We might have to check afterwards. But yes, I get asked about this tradition all the time by alumni. I don't know if it still happens, but we'll check in afterwards. It's a similar tradition
to the one that Jakob Ingebrigtsen did for his stag do, right?
I mean, I don't know what that is, but I'm guessing you're right. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So right, we'll move on. People might delete what we've just said there, but we should say. Allowed? Oh, well, we might be talking about something different. I don't know. The actual thing people are talking to me about is going to do a nudie run around the track.
Oh, see, I thought you were talking about the Chunder Mile. No, you don't know what.
No,
the half was because women were on the half pints.
Ah, okay. Well, we can talk about that. So what would the Chunder Mile be?
As to why that would be so legal.
So the one I'm talking about. Have you ever heard of that?
No. I don't think maybe that existed in the 90s.
Well, it's people from around your generation who are always the ones who ask me about it. So that's why I thought it'd be interesting to ask you.
See, I've heard of it happening in town, but not on campus. I think it was just in town, and I think it happened after nights out, and it started out as a dare, and then it had to be run from further and further and further. So no, once that was actually happening outside my house.
I knew it was a random question.
The Chunder Mile is official, and there is an official record, and that's the one that Ingebrigtsen did on his stag night.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. And it was quick. It was like 6 minutes.
I will check if there's any of my students who still had a go at that. So I did say I'd ask that random question. So let's move on. So it's been great to hear about your time at Loughborough, and it will intertwine with some of this. So as we mentioned in the intro, you are a 4-time Olympian. Can you tell us about your experiences and how you feel this has changed over time? And I think if you could start around that 96, because I'm pretty sure you graduated around that same time. So preparing for an event like that whilst a student, and then take us through the journey of the following years.
Yeah. Well, it pretty much started. So in 92, I finished 4th in the trial with the qualifying time. So at that point already, it became that 4-year plan, because I mean, I wasn't disappointed. It was a phenomenal run for me to get 4th, and I had not planned to try and get on the Olympic team that year, but it definitely consolidated the belief that I could do, and it became a plan to work through uni towards those Olympics in 96. And like you say, I was doing my finals. I was out, for the World Cross Country in March of that year, and picked up a stress fracture in my shin. And so I had to sit out some time there trying to finish dissertations and get all that revision done, and still cross training like mad. And I can remember doing a lot of laps of Charnwood Pool with an aqua belt, and the old ladies swimming with their shower hats would be saying, well, what are you training for? And I'm like, the Olympics. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know they had running in the pool in the Olympics. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to keep some kind of base there. But then got through my finals and went straight out to the French Pyrenees, which was a location that I discovered on my year abroad. So for my year abroad, I basically didn't go with the organised uni setup. I found myself a job in Germany for 5 months in order to be able to go and stay in the Olympic Training Centre in the French Pyrenees and experiment with altitude training for the first time. And so it massively worked for me. And so I really wanted to implement it in 96, but of course couldn't go until I'd finished my finals. So I went straight out to Font-Romeu, and I was out there with my coaches training. And on the day that the results came through, Gary, my husband-to-be, was in Loughborough and went and got the results, because this was the 90s. You didn't get those by email. You had to go in and see it all on the notice board. So he got those, and bless him, was so excited because he knew it was really important to me to get my first. He called my brother, but didn't call me because he knew it was my nap time in between training sessions. Whereas my brother called me straight away, woke me up from my nap, and then realised I didn't actually know, and he was breaking the news to me. So then he had to say, you've got to pretend like you don't know. And I'm not even sure that Gary even knows to this day that my brother told me first.
He does now.
But yeah, I got the results, and then we went out and did a hill session that night. And I think that gave me an extra psychological boost going in. And then we went out to Tallahassee. And that was one of the years where, probably looking back, the BOA got it slightly wrong in terms of the fact that they sent us to Tallahassee to adapt for Atlanta, but Tallahassee was way worse in terms of humidity and the conditions. So for a lot of us, we were perhaps a little bit drained. I mean, I was perhaps drained from everything coming into it, but certainly I felt like I didn't have an amazing run. I didn't have a terrible run. I came 5th, but I felt like had I been in the shape I was in earlier in the year, I might have been able to snatch a medal at those Olympics. But outside of that, an amazing experience, my first experience of the Olympics, and to be walking around the village and seeing the American NBA team there, Pete Sampras in the village, it was a weird setup and very surreal, but at the same time, very, very exciting. And I think I had either raced my heat or my final the night of the bombing as well in Centennial Park. So I had come back into the village. So I had all of that experience of team managers coming around with torches, checking who was in the beds and who wasn't, and kind of that alarm of the Olympics being hit. Wow. And yeah. This was 96. I mean, it was a long way on from, and a lot less serious than what happened in 72, but still nothing had really happened like that in that interim period. And so it was at the time a bit of a shock, but then very quickly everything just got back to being about the sport and being about the Olympics. And yeah, it was a very, very different experience for me in Atlanta compared to Sydney, because Sydney was really in a country that got sport. Whereas in the US, I still think there were those surreal moments in the stadium where they'd actually be explaining to people how far one lap was, and where the people had to try and throw the javelin and things like that, but it wasn't like darts and you weren't trying to hit a certain segment. You were just trying to throw it as far as you could, because the crowd was not as knowledgeable about track and field then as they probably are today. There's been huge growth in that area in the US.
That's really interesting to kind of get that context on it, and like you said, so many new experiences after university there to train, and we'll touch upon this in a minute. You mentioned Sydney, but to train and potentially overtrain or overload based on, I'm presuming, was it heat and altitude that you were training at?
I was using altitude in the build-up. I don't think I overtrained on that. I think it was the humidity, heat side of it. I mean, I can remember we were all learning, and I can remember in Tallahassee, and this was 96, so Kelly Holmes was carrying an injury. She was in the pool a lot of the time. There seemed to be a lot of coaches like watching to see what would happen when we first got out there. And I remember my coach and I went out, and it was very warm, very humid, and basically there was like 3/4 of the track in direct sunlight, and then a building, an air-conditioned building to the side of it. And we were doing 800-meter reps, and the recovery was jogging into the air-conditioning building and coming back out. And there was like a row of coaches actually watching me just to see whether I would survive the session, and they'd report back and then see what was going on from there. But also some really good success stories from that. So George was out there, and he would be driving a minibus out to, I think we were pretty much close to like one of the top golf courses in Atlanta, but we would be driving, it wasn't Augusta, but we were driving out to that and just running around that first thing in the morning, and getting our runs done. And so to be doing that with John Brown, and then he was getting a bit cross because he thought I was pushing one of the runs on too much, but that he was performing at the top level already in those. And then of course built on that with 2 phenomenal 4th places later in his career.
Again, like the mentioning of like running with other people and that kind of thing, I think we can touch upon that later on, whether that's elite level or kind of participation level. I think it's really important. So you started in 96, and you've already kind of mentioned 2000 at Sydney. Over the period of the 4 Olympics that you were part of, what changed in terms of that? Because it sounds a little bit like you were an experiment in 96. Go train in the heat, let's see what happens. And then, is there many other things that have changed in terms of your training plans and things like that over those years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's lots of things you're forever learning. And that's one of the things that my coach definitely was a strong believer in, and it was a philosophy that he passed on to me. And I think in life in general, we're always learning new things, and you always have to adapt to things. And so that was a valuable lesson that I learned in Atlanta, and it was probably personal to me. I wasn't doing enough easy running either, and it was the first time that I'd really been in that sapping a humidity to kind of learn the effects that it had on your body. And it's pretty humbling then to run a time which you're capable of a lot quicker, and that's the first idea that you have of being able to factor in a time difference for conditions like that. And so that definitely stood me in good stead moving forward to Beijing and those conditions. And if I think to what I saw happen with Mo Farah, it was kind of similar in terms of that was his learning experience, but he was obviously younger than me and coming into the peak of his career then. But I remember we were in Macau, and I had obviously already learned from that experience and from other ones. So I knew to be careful with the training there. It was a slightly different story for me because I'd had a stress fracture in my femur building into it. So I really was only starting to run outside in Macau. So it was also trying to balance that really strong urge to play a huge amount of catch up with the fact that I couldn't do that in those conditions. But so it was really as an outsider looking at Mo that looking back now, you see his performances in Beijing. He needed to learn that you can't train as hard as you would do in perfect conditions in less than ideal conditions. And he learned that phenomenally well, as evidenced by the rest of his career. And I think that the whole support network and sports science network behind not just athletics, but all the sports had grown phenomenally over that time as well, in terms of just the way that we were rehydrating far, far better. Recovery was far, far better, even just in that gap in the gap already from 96 to 2004, it had improved. Perhaps even to Sydney. So it was always improving and growing and growing. And the support that the BOA and the team, British Athletics, UK Athletics, that's kind of evolved over the time as well with different names, but the setup has been the same and the learning process.
You've talked a little there about learning, and you've touched upon a number of areas where things have evolved over the last 20 to 30 years. So you talk recovery, injury. We've not mentioned nutrition, but I'd imagine that comes in there. This psychology. I've been doing this podcast for 4 years now, so we've had lots of podcasts, and we've spoken to research experts or practitioners or athletes around loads of these different areas. One that's, well, a couple that are really popular actually. One is strength training for endurance athletes. There's a podcast on that, so it'd be interesting to touch upon that. And the other one is females and the menstrual cycle. So are any of those that I've just spoken about, is there anything where you give advice to people now of where you think, right, that's the most important area, or actually is it very individual and actually just get an understanding of all those elements for yourself?
Well, I think you're right. It's the all-encompassing every single element that's relevant to you. If you kind of touch base on all of those, then you're going to see a strong performance improvement. But I think the strength training for marathon running, for distance running, is hugely important. I mean, when you think about the basic of the marathon, is the human body doesn't have enough glycogen reserves to get you through the marathon distance, and the fact that glycogen is stored in the muscle, it's pretty logical that we need to make sure that we've got strong muscles. But a lot of people tend to focus on the fact that marathon runners need to be lean, they need to be slight. You're talking about body fat as low as possible, which isn't actually I mean, obviously body fat being low, yes, that's good, but it's the lean muscle mass that's really, really important. And that strength training for me was vital in terms of being able to maintain the form at the end of the marathon, and even in 10K and things like that. So I started working with Max Jones just for my strength training program back in 98, 99, and saw immediate results with the silver medal in the 10,000 meters in Seville. And it was an eye opener for me that doing this work in the gym made me substantially quicker. Things like, and more explosive. So my 400 meter closing speed, while it was never going to be earth shattering for the people I was racing, it was improving for me. And I was seeing those gains there, and it really, really worked for me. But Max was learning with me as well. I mean, he was a throws coach, helping out a distance runner for the first time. And I can remember when I transitioned to the marathon, this was 2002, and I was out in Albuquerque, and I called him and I said, I don't know what happened, but my cleans are just like rubbish today. I really wasn't getting anywhere close to what I normally do. So he said, well, talk me through your last couple of days. So I said, well, didn't do that much yesterday. I just did a couple of recovery runs, and then I did my 23 miler this morning, and then I went into the gym, and I couldn't do the cleans as well. And he went, yeah, stop there. That would be why. But you probably can't go in. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, it's a single day session, so I've got the afternoon free, so I might as well put my weight session in there. But yeah, we quickly learned that not only was it probably a huge injury risk, but I wasn't going to get a very good weight session out of an extremely tired body after a hard 23 miler in the morning. So it was us learning how to balance that as well. To obviously the priority is the running training, but the strength training is a very, very important part of that. And I guess within that, I touched on the body fat part, and that obviously leads into the whole Rett syndrome and the menstrual cycle as well. And I feel like that is one area where now there's been a huge amount of growth in terms of how much it's discussed, how comfortable male medics and male coaches are in talking about that, and in learning from it, and how lucky I was that way ahead of my time, I had a coach who was extremely switched on to that, mom, parents, and a doctor who were great, because when I went away to university, my periods became irregular for the first time, and then when I finished university, they came back fully regular all the way through my career. So it had zero to do with body fat and was totally related to stress. And at the time, the athletics medics tried to put me on the pill, which didn't work out for me. We talked about it amongst other female athletes. But when I tried to say to the medics, look, I just don't really feel right. And I remember vividly discussing it with Alison Wyeth, with Sonia O'Sullivan at races, and saying, yeah, you know what, if we're taking that, we just don't feel sharp mentally. So we're just not making those adrenaline fueled racing decisions as well, and not as aggressive, and you need to be aggressive when you're racing. So we kind of figured that out, but it wasn't coming from a medic's background. And so then I remember going to see my GP, family GP at home, who basically got all my bone density checked out and everything like that, and said, no, you are fine so long as you're getting 2 or 3 a year. Your bone density is good. You don't need to be trying to do anything else with the hormones. And it did work out. But again, that was just luck. That was just luck that I had that network around me to be able to pick up on that. And I think so many female athletes fell into this trap and would not, once that damage is done to your body, it's very, very difficult to recover from it. And the other thing that I've seen learn over the years is, and I can't remember the exact name of it, something beginning with P, that the medics will give female athletes to stop the period coming. And it's the worst thing that any athlete can take, because it stops you at the worst time. So you just end up being blocked at that time when your body actually feels its worst. And I can remember giving advice to other athletes not to ever touch it. And then yet frustratingly still seeing 6-7 years down the line, athletes not racing well and then finding out that that's the reason why. So it is something that now I'm so glad that people talk about and people discuss, and the research is out there, even down to the types of training, the types of weightlifting that you should be doing, and explosive training, because if you are close to your period, then you're more likely to strain a muscle. And there's different types of training that you can do at different points of the cycle, which I think having that research in, the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, then the more advances are going to be made there, because there's no reason that you can't run well.
Definitely. It's so interesting to hear you talk about that, because you were saying, I think 1998 with strength training, and then all these things that came out that you were talking about there around your period, who you work with, and athletes and practitioners, and and then often the debate, I sit in between research and practice. This podcast is all about bridging the gap between research and practice. And you'll have this thing where actually practitioners sometimes are more advanced and the research is catching up, but then the research starts to confirm things and we can start to change things and we can start to do different things. And I think we're in quite a good space now in doing the research. I don't think historically we have, because a lot of the research around whatever, strength training, endurance, everything is with males. And we have a huge push at Loughborough at the moment around the Women in Sport Research Hub. And we're trying to increase the amount of research that's specifically on females. I've done podcasts around running shoes, for example. So you'll know this miles better than me. But like football boots, and I'm imagining running shoes as well, are made for male feet. And actually changing the size of the feet is one thing that people are moving forward with. There's so many elements that actually we need to get much more specific with the female athlete.
But it's not so much the feet. It is partly the feet, but it's also the whole skeletal system. So the Q angle that women are coming. So women's shoes need to have that, certainly for running, they need to have that protection, that cushioning in different areas to the men's shoe. And every woman will be different as well. So some females might be able to run very well in the male shoes, some might not. So it is about that individuality. And I think that's where the research is starting to come through. And it's great that they're focusing on the women, because it's not just physique, it's not just training, it's not just weightlifting, it's not just the way our bodies are. The whole female psyche is different as well. So from a psychological point of view, it's very, very different. And what you might say to motivate a woman might be very different to what you would say to motivate a guy. And
like, as you touched upon at the start, having so many different athletes based at Loughborough and the research going on at the same time, it's just, there's such a hub, there's such a buzz around things like Loughborough Lightning at the moment. So netball, football, rugby, we have lots of female athletes on campus where actually we can start digging deeper into this research and backing up sometimes what you already know, or challenging what you might think and testing, is that what's happening or is it something else? So that's a major push for us at the moment. I did ask my wife if she had a question that she'd like me to ask you, and it was linked to this. So it was around pregnancy. And how did you carry on preparing for World Championships and other events after post-pregnancy? So you gave birth in
January of 2007 for the first time, and then September 2010.
And so how have you carried on to train and compete since those?
So when my daughter was born, I mean, at that time, kind of going back to actually getting pregnant, basically before I had any idea of what I wanted to achieve in sport and in running, I knew I wanted to be a mum. So it was something that was really important to me. And it was something that it was important not to leave it too late in my career, that it would be a regret if it couldn't work out or something like that. And I had very, very good role models in the form of Sonia O'Sullivan, Liz McColgan, Ingrid Christensen, who had children and come back to competing at the top level. So in my mind, it was never not going to be possible. And I can remember talking to my mum about it. How do I find the right time? And she said, you know what, on paper, there's never a right time, but whatever time you get pregnant will become the right time, which was really, really great advice. So basically I couldn't run the London Marathon in 2006, couldn't go to the Commonwealth Games because I picked up I had a neuroma injury in my toe. So just on the spur of the moment, we just thought, right, okay, now might work. Let's just try now. And we're really lucky that it kind of worked and fit into that timing slot of trying to get back really securely for Beijing in 2008. But what I found is that I was extremely fortunate. I had some great advice from a sports gynecologist in Michael Dooley in London in terms of training through the pregnancy and what were the important things to look at, because that was what there wasn't a lot of advice around about at the time. So to know that, because the moment you know you're pregnant, your focus becomes not the training, but the baby being okay. What can I do that will enable me to stay healthy and do the right thing for the baby, and to make sure the baby is absolutely perfect? So he was really, really great at giving me that brilliant advice, essential things like just monitoring that your core body temperature not go too high, what were the heart rate zones that I could safely train in, and what was not safe to do, and different just reassuring checks that you can do to make sure the baby's fine afterwards, and monitoring growth and things like that. So I was very lucky. I had a very smooth pregnancy until the end when she just refused to come. So had to be induced, and in the end the doctor was actually telling me to go out and run hill reps and run up and down the steps just to see if we could bring on the pregnancy. Still didn't work.
We had one exactly the same. My daughter was exactly the same, and both my wife and I had enough, and she was doing squats in the front room to kind of go, come on, let's get this out.
But unfortunately, if that baby doesn't want to, there's nothing that can bring it on other than actually inducing. But yeah, once she was born, I think the classic thing is the first time, phenomenally happy, wanted to get back to running because that's my way of kind of expressing when I'm happy, and probably pushed back a little bit too quickly. She was a very, very easy baby in terms of slept very well, fed very well. I had an amazing network around me. I had physio who was quite happy to babysit when she wasn't treating me. And I had both sets of parents, so Gary's parents and my parents, who kind of traded off. So we had somebody looking after Isla at all times, so I could really get into training. And what I didn't realize was that a elliptical machine stresses the sacrum more than running. So I thought I was being smart in terms of not ramping up my running volume too quickly, and doing all these sessions on the cross trainer at night. And I ended up with a sacral stress fracture, which kind of set me back. So I was actually envisaging, she was born 17th of January. And at one point I was envisaging being able to run the Manchester 10K in May. But then the stress fracture came along, wasn't able to do that, wasn't able to go to the World Champs in Osaka that year, but was able to get back to racing in New York in 2007. So in November, beginning of November 2007, so what, Isla was just under 10 months old, 9.5 months old, and I was able to get back to and win in New York. And that for me was like a dream come true, to be able to have my baby there at the finish line when I finished the race, and huge amount of extra motivation in that race, but also to be back doing what I love doing.
And that's brilliant to hear and tell that story, that, you know, the support network around you was certainly helpful, but the fact that you could get back and hit it at the top level, great example of being able to do that it doesn't hold you back. I don't want for a better word, but it really doesn't. And you've proved that, and that's not taking away the challenges from lots of other people.
At the time, Jana Pittman was pregnant as well with her son Cole, and he was born, I think, a month before Isla, because he might have actually come on time, and maybe a little bit early. But he was born, and she came back to win the World Championships in the summer, so she had already kind of set the bar. And we'd kind of compared notes through the pregnancy, obviously two very, very different events. She was 400 meter hurdles and I was trying to get back to the marathon. But we compared notes through that pregnancy, and to see her come back and to win that championships was a great, great motivation for me.
That's amazing. I'm very conscious that we're kind of starting to run out of time, because I could talk to you all day about loads of this stuff. But I did mention at the start that we were going to talk about what you're doing now and the future. Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk us through what you are doing now and what you want to see happen in the future?
I guess I'm doing a lot of things now. It's a kind of a mix of things going on, which I really enjoy. I think, having lived the life of an athlete, I would have really struggled to slot into a 9-to-5 job and just be doing that. So I love the stimulation of doing lots of different things. I commentate, and I love being part of that commentary team. And it's kind of like learning a whole new different skill from scratch at 40. But at the same time, I feel like we've got a great team spirit when we're working together. A lot of people help each other. But we've got a very privileged seat in terms of watching some amazing performances and having the privilege of being able to relay that to the people at home. So absolutely love doing that. Get very nervous from it, still have huge amount to learn, but really love doing that part of it. I like doing the interaction, the motivational speaking, particularly, well, both ends, in the business world and learning lots of new things on that side, but particularly working with kids as well, and just trying to kind of get kids captivated by the beauty of sport, and kind of really express that it's not just about school and it's not just about those results. You can get the best out of yourself there by finding your passion. And it might not be sport, it might be something else, it might be art, but by finding your passion in the same way that I did. So kind of just encouraging people just to try lots of things, but underlying and underpinning all of that to stay physically active, because I'm a huge believer it doesn't matter what level that you play sport to, but you need to have it in your life, and it is a huge part not just of physical health but mental health and what you go on to achieve in life and how you interact with other people. So kind of bringing all that together, that's why I like working with Lewis and Gemma at New Levels Coaching, and bringing out the Paula Radcliffe Marathon Academy there, and trying to kind of just pass on some of that love and some of the lessons that I've learned from marathoning to people who are going on that journey and just starting on that journey, or trying to improve that journey, trying to improve their personal best. And I love that it's a whole spectrum of abilities and athletes, and you meet some really, really interesting people. And then also my Family's on Track event, which was brought to life for me by Steve Cram's events company, Events of the North. So we kind of brainstormed the idea, and they helped me to bring it to life. And it had started out as an idea of my daughter's, and we talked about it. And the first event that we went to up in Durham in 2019, and they'd set it all up, and we drove past in the car, and she looked out and she went, "Mom, it's exactly how it's supposed to be." And that was just really great to see that team work together and bring it to life. And it still is. I mean, I have a lot of fun doing it. Whether it's actually going to go any further, I don't know. But the biggest joy for me is just seeing people who don't normally run just come up to me at the end and say, "You know what? It might be a grandma who hasn't run for 50 years. And, I just ran around a 250-meter loop and I really loved it." Or one time we had 16-year-old turned up in jeans, wasn't interested, wasn't going to run with her team. And then halfway through, she's out there running loops for them. And that for me is what it's all about. It's about taking away any side of the competitive part of it and just getting people just having fun. And that feeling that probably inspired us all to start running right when we were kids is just that feeling of feeling free and enjoying running.
That running piece is really interesting, because I used to work I managed a personal training studio in Sydney, and I own a gym now. And I've often sat down with people, and we used to take on, like, what do you enjoy doing? What don't you? And the amount of times people said, "I hate running. I'm not running. I'm not doing it." And then we'd get to a piece where we said, right, ultimate goal, you're the fittest person you could possibly be. What would you really love to do? And so many times they'd say, "Do you know what? I'd love to run a marathon, but it's not possible." And we'd kind of take that down. And then, 8 weeks later, they've lost a bit of weight. And then maybe 3-4 months later, they've lost a bit more weight. And, "Oh, we've got Run Club, by the way. Do you want to come? We've got Walk Club as well." And they used to come to that. We had so many people in Australia in particular run the Sydney Marathon that had told us they hated running. And like you said, once you can get over those first barriers and actually get walking, get jogging, do your couch to 5K, whatever, and then run, it is, I don't know what it is, but you're free. You can do it very easily. There's something about running that kind of, gets you there. I don't think you necessarily know until you know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And there still might be people who really do still hate it, and that's fine. But there are a huge amount of people, and I think certainly when I was at school, the school sports punishment of sending people out to run cross country around the fields has a lot to answer for. And people also just jump in. I mean, that's why now things like Couch to 5K are brilliant, because too many people just before had no idea of where to start and how to gradually build it up. So, of course, if you jump in and you try and run 10K for the first time ever, you're going to hate it. But if you go out and you do a little bit and you start to build up very gradually, and you do a bit of walk, jog, as you were saying, and you build it up more comfortably, then it's going to be a much, much nicer experience.
Definitely. So your Families on Track event is to inspire families to be more active together.
Yeah, I mean, it's organised chaos. We have a lot of fun. We have, so it started out along the idea that I wanted the family to achieve 10K as a family unit together. And I started out on kind of Eckhardtian philosophy, but then I was thinking, well, no, because they're going to be young kids stranded down the road somewhere. So we were brainstorming it, and I was brainstorming it with Steve and Alison, and we came up with the idea of the pit lane. So we have the pit lane, which is the family zone, and every family has their own little pen, and they decorate that how they want to. And out of that, we have the 3 loops. So there's a 250-meter loop, a 500-meter loop, and a 1K loop. And they're very zigzaggy. It's not going to be something that you're going to run your fastest 1K split on. But the great thing about it is if you're a 2-year-old running around that, you can be in full view of your parents, and you can see your family the whole way around, and you feel like you're still safe. Your child is still safe out there, and it's not intimidating in that way. And then when you come in, you pick up a different coloured ball according to which loop you've just run, which coloured loop, and then it's up to the family to add up their 10K themselves. And when you've finished, you all come in together as a family across the finish line and get your medal. And there's no bigger prize for the winner. The person who comes in first or the person who comes in last. It is just about every family encouraging and finishing that 10K together. And like I say, we have the loose age limit. You're supposed to be 2, but I think we might have had a couple slightly younger. We've had wheelchairs go around it. We have an amazing boy comes along to Worcester every year with like a walker, and he'll sit on that for part of it and get pushed around it, and he'll run bits as well.
That's amazing. I mentioned to you prior that I'm doing some research around the Opening School Facilities program at the moment. Like hooking things up like that as like celebration type events in areas through active partnerships and things like that would be absolutely amazing. So like muster up and connect with all those people, all those kind of things. It'd be amazing.
No, that would be brilliant, because that's one of the things that I've really noticed having kids coming out of COVID and the pandemic is the rise in obesity in kids, and kids that stop doing sport just they have no opportunity to get back into it. And once that habit is broken, it's very, very hard to kickstart it again. So I think, ultimately something like that. I've talked to the schools here about it, because with Families on Track, we generally have teams of between 3 and 5 people. And through the school system, you could have a child from each year. And you could put together a team. There'd be no pressure amongst the teams. It's not like you're racing everybody else in your year. You'd be racing all the different age groups, but just to be able to get people just out with no pressure, just enjoying that physical activity.
It's been absolutely amazing. I could have done a whole series talking about everything we've just spoken about. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. So thank you for your time, and we'll be in touch, hopefully.
Will do. And say hi to Loughborough.
Will do. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@alborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.